Hey, I'm Osman Faruqi, and this is The Drop, a culture show from the Sydney Morning Herald and The Age, where we dive into the latest in the world of pop culture and entertainment. I'm here with Mel Camberry and Thomas Mitchell. What's up, team?
Oh, just here in the podcast, I realize I am wearing a chef-themed outfit for today's podcast. It's a visual gag. Just wanted to get ahead of it.
What do you mean you realize? You put it on and sat down.
Well, I just thought it would be appropriate.
Yeah.
For people who can't look at Thomas, which is most of you because this is a podcast, he's wearing a white T-shirt, his famous white T-shirts with a dark blue, navy blue apron in the style of Kami Bizzato from The Bear. He looks very good in it. But you were saying you don't think that apron is particularly robust. It's not going to mop up spills.
No, this is not. This is obviously like an apron that's been made to be sent out to journalists. You would never wear this in a kitchen, I don't think.
And the reason Thomas has this is because he has such a reputation in the office for being obsessed with the bear that one of our fashion writers received it in the mail and then placed it as a little surprise on his desk, along with a hat.
Yes, correct. That was very nice of him. A hat that says, yes, chef. Very nice to dress as Kami, even before we get a chance to talk about him. Otherwise, all good.
Will you wear it all day?
Yes, correct.
Yeah, you've probably guessed that we'll be talking about the bear on today's show. But before we get there, congratulations, Thomas, on predicting Origin last week. You said Blues by 20. Very impressive. It's what happened.
I know. I've been telling you guys for ages, if you just follow me and especially follow me when I go heavily into financial predictions, then you'll be all right. Literally, I picked the scoreline and I can't wait to do the same thing. I think July 17th is game 3. So,
can I ask what ballpark of money or winnings you made?
It was actually a pretty good win,
Really?
to be honest. Yeah, it was
so good. He doesn't want to say the number so the tax man doesn't find out.
Correct.
Before we get into the guts of today's app, I wanted to ask you guys if you had seen these photos that emerged from Gladiator 2. I'm not sure if they're set photos or they're official released film stills. They were part of a Vanity Fair first look profile on this film. So this is Ridley Scott doing the sequel. No Russell Crowe, but yes to Paul Mescal, yes to Joseph Quinn, yes to Denzel Washington. I thought these looked pretty sick. You guys know that I'm, not super high on Paul. I'm a bit sad that Rusty is not going to be in this one. But looking at these photos, and particularly the fit that Denzel is in, got me really excited. What did you guys think?
Oh man, I've got a lot of time for Denzel, especially lately. I think I've watched every single film he has been in the last year. Denzel Washington has been my genre, so I'm really excited.
That's cool.
Yeah, all the Equalizers, Man on Fire, all of them. I'm excited to see him in it. I think the pictures looked good, right? I know I've had a bit of concerns about Ridley Scott because of Napoleon, that it might just be a kind of big men doing big men things. But I don't know, it made me excited. But also what I'm really excited about is that we might have a Barbenheimer matchup with Wicked and Gladiator coming out on the same day in November. That's going to be huge.
Gladiator.
Glicked. Yeah.
Glicked is good. Oh, we should coin that here first.
Yeah, I don't know. The more I hear about this movie, the more I feel like it's increasingly an internet play. It's got Pedro Pascal and Paul Mescal and everyone else that rhymes. I don't know if it's going to be that good. I really like the photos of Paul. I'm here for Paul. I'm not part of the anti-Paul brigade like Osman is. I did think it was very funny seeing some photos of Joseph Quinn online, and it was I saw one meme that was lol, this looks like the kind of guy who leaves his wife Ariana Grande. I thought that was very funny. I don't know. For me, Gladiator, the first one, the initial one, is such a great film, and I just don't know if I need to go back there. I'm happy. I think Russell, all power to him. You keep finding exorcisms to do on screen. That's where you should be now, and I just don't know if this film is going to tarnish the legacy.
I actually found the first Gladiator, because we were quite young when it came out, and I remember watching it with my dad. I found it quite traumatic, that image of the family hanging from the ropes and
it's some a dark
of the
movie.
Yeah. I often think about it. So I'll be interested to see if they make this one as dark and violent. I'm sure they will, knowing Ridley Scott and what we've seen in Napoleon.
There are so few films left that just exist as independent, standalone, pieces of culture. Everything is getting mined and turned into IP with a million sequels. I feel I'm like you, Thomas. I don't feel convinced we need a sequel. If Ridley wants to get in the dust with Paul and Denzel and Pedro Pascal, find a project for that. But I can't help but feel like a sequel that inevitably won't be as good or as important as the first one kind of could sully it, because now it's not just Gladiator, this great film from 24 years ago. It's Gladiator and Gladiator 2. But I have to say, yeah, some of my cynicism was brushed to the side just by seeing some of these photos. And like I said, particularly Denzel, who looks fucking awesome in that sort of blue outfit he was wearing. Very exciting.
I mean, we all have lots of time for Denzel, but yeah, I do think somewhere, where was he this weekend? Glastonbury, Russell Crowe, like probably punching a dart, being like, yeah, fuck you guys. It'll never be as good as the first one.
I'm mainly excited for the Gladiator pod because then you can dress as a gladiator. Like maybe that's going to be your thing now.
Yeah, okay, cool.
And you'll be dressed as Elphaba, the wicked. Is she the Wicked Witch? I don't know
which one she is, but I will be.
Any other news you guys want to talk about? Joe Biden tanking in the presidential debate, the governors tapping him on the shoulder. You want to pivot to being a political podcast for a bit?
Should I dress up as Joe Biden or?
I mean, you do stare off into space a bit.
There's a culture angle to that. It was a televised, debate he didn't do very well in.
No, and then all the video of him not dancing, I find it quite painful to watch the whole thing. Like, I feel like I'm trying to avoid engaging with it too much because it stresses me out when I get into the weeds of it and really think about it.
Yeah, to be clear, it was a joke. I wasn't planning on us having an extended conversation about Biden's chances.
I've been too busy engaging with like the anti-hot chocolate mafia, so unfortunately...
Do you want to talk about that, Thomas? You had a pretty tough weekend online. You shared your thoughts about hot chocolate and why adults shouldn't be drinking it, and it became like you became Twitter's main character for a weekend,
Yeah.
which is never good. I believe I used the term you got at OzEffed.
Yeah, I was expecting a bit more like of leadership from you because you've been there so many times, but like of all the dumb shit I've written, and I've written some pretty dumb stuff, this one really seemed to strike a chord. Woke up on Monday morning to like thousands of Twitter notifications, a call from a radio station asking me if I wanted to talk about my drink shaming article, which was an amazing
That
term.
one was actually my fault. They called me and they said, "Do you have Thomas's number? We want to interview him about his hot chocolate." And I said, "Yes, here it is. Please give him a buzz."
And the funniest thing is, like, obviously, these things happen. You write something, whatever, people don't agree with it, and then Twitter, like, takes a hold. But just, I find it so funny. Some of the tweets just, like, really made me laugh. Even though, like, I would read them to my wife and she'd be like, "Oh, my God, that makes me so sad." This one guy wanted me to stick my wobbly bits in a mulcher, which I thought was particularly creative. But then there was one that had 1,000 retweets, and it was just like, well, at least we can all agree on something. Thomas Mitchell is a moron.
There was one that was just like, "Let the people drink what they want, you hot chocolate eating journalist."
Yeah.
It had 15,000 likes.
So yeah, I mean, it's good. It was a fun experience, but I would say I did have a hot chocolate yesterday as a way of getting the heat off, and it was quite nice. But again, I stand by the fact that it's not an everyday drink.
All right, well, speaking of food and drink related opinions, let's talk about The Bear.
Feel good?
You feel good?
Gonna see. We're open.
Let's fire Cavatelli.
Enjoy.
Fire Wagyu.
Take your time.
Just bear with us one more second.
Refire.
I'm getting drilled out there.
Where are hands?
This is a dysfunctional kitchen.
Show me a functional one.
A little bit of housekeeping first, maybe, because The Bear is released all in one go on Disney+. So all 10 episodes are available now of Season 3. It makes talking about it kind of tricky because we don't really know where everyone is at with the show since everyone watches it at a different pace. Our conversation today, we're going to focus on the first 5 episodes, and we'll talk about the second half of the season next week. So our conversation will include spoilers up to and including episode 5. If you haven't watched that far and you don't want to be spoiled, maybe catch up and then come back to us. There's a few different threads to how I think we should tackle this conversation. This was one of our most anticipated shows of the year. The critical and audience reception to season 3 has been more mixed than the first 2, which was basically universal acclaim and a swag of Emmys. I want to talk about how the season's being received and what that might tell us about how people are feeling about this kind of television right now. But first, I just want to talk to you guys about what you think of this season. The first episode in particular elicited some very, very strong responses. Season 2 ends with Kami locked in the freezer at the restaurant. He's screaming at cousin Richie. He's fighting with his girlfriend, Claire. When we pick things back up with the premiere of season 3, we have this very non-linear, largely exposition and dialogue-free episode. It's a little bit experimental. It takes us a little bit after the events of the season 2 finale, but it mainly focuses on Kami's past. What did you guys make of this pretty wild way to kick off a very highly anticipated season of a TV show?
Yeah, I feel that third seasons are tough for any show. It's a make or break point. And The Bear finished on such a powerful note last time. It reached such a climactic peak that it was always going to be hard to follow. I actually think if there hadn't been a season break and this had been attached to the last season, this episode might have worked better. It might have been just what we needed after the highs of Kami being locked in the fridge. But to start a new season, I thought this episode was self-indulgent and annoying. And it actually really summarised what's wrong with the rest of the season. I will say we've only seen up to 5, and I feel like from what I've read, there's some high notes coming in the rest of the season. And we know from the second season, I think some of the best episodes came in the second half. So, I mean, I will caveat with we've only seen the top one. But this episode just summed it up. It's kind of reliance on melodrama, it's obsession with montages, it's obsession with throwing back into the past, it's kind of weird, heavy-handed use of music. It's a very aimless episode. I don't know, like, Kami is obsessed with, like, continuously evolving, and that's a bit of a theme through the episode, but, like, the show has not done that, and I think this first ep really summarises what my issues are with the first 5.
Yeah, I mean, it pains me to say this, given I'm literally sat here dressed like Kami as an adult, but, like, yeah, I guess in answer to your question about the episode 1 in particular, I did really think it was a style over substance thing. It just felt so overblown to me. Like, you know, it was undoubtedly beautiful. The show has never had an issue with the way it looks and the way it feels. It, like, you know, the shots are beautiful. The food looks beautiful. It's hard to not take a nice take in Copenhagen, like, you know, because we see Kami kind of like revisiting all the places he's worked. And essentially we're meant to be learning about how he came to be this kind of anxious mess of a guy who kind of, you know, repeats the cycle of abuse, blah, blah, blah. But, like, I just found it that could have been a montage in a part of the episode rather than basically the entire episode. And, you know, I understand we're coming off the back of the finale, which was so tense. And I think that fight between Richie and Kami in the fridge was like one of the best scenes of the series. And maybe this, you know, they wanted to really change the pace when they were bringing us back into the show. But I felt like it just was really kind of limp. You know, like, it's so funny that we constantly get this mantra from Chef Terry of like every second counts, and the show is like not thinking about that at all. Instead, we're just kind of being forced to be like, oh, look at all these pretty pictures. And you know, I think in what Mel said, I think really agree with. That is a snapshot of what I think a lot of the issues with the first 5 episodes of season 3 are so far, for me anyway. I don't know. I feel like, Osman, I know that you watched it in a particular context and you seem to dig it.
Well, I will say that I think there is a structural problem with this season, and it goes to the first episode as well, that I think you touched on. This was supposed to be a 3-season arc, and the success of the first 2 has prompted Disney or FX or whichever Disney subsidiary is in charge of this to say to the creator Chris Storer, hey, we want 4 seasons. And I think it really feels like he's taking a season's worth of stuff and stretching it out over 2 seasons. Like that point you made about every second counting, that not happening, I think that's really spot on. I feel like there's big moments of this season, either entire episodes or bits of episodes that just feel like filler, that aren't really driving things forward or not taking the kinds of swings or the big set pieces that we've come to love and appreciate from the show. And I hear you guys on the first episode as well, and I can see why it didn't work for a lot of people. I had a slightly different response to it, and I'm not trying to say that if you didn't like it, you're wrong or anything like that, and it may have to do with my mental state. Thomas, you and I was in Sydney, we're hanging out, we had a wonderful night at a wonderful restaurant in Sydney, Auntie in Newtown, delicious food, delicious drink. I caught a flight the next morning. I was like a bit tired, a bit emotional, in a certain mental state, and I watched this episode of television that I found visually quite beautiful, I think Chris Storer is like using the cachet that he's got and the budget he's got to just flex his muscles a little bit. And part of me respects that. Like, you've created 2 seasons of a great show. Everyone loves you. You can kind of do whatever you want. You're at your apex now. And he said, I want an episode that I just want to like have a bit of fun in, that I want to shoot in an interesting way, that I want to make a little bit daring, a little bit experimental. I kind of appreciated that. I'm glad the whole season isn't that. I think it's interesting and nice of him to stretch himself in a direction. I also did find some of the themes of it really interesting. Like, it is a bit of a restatement of the thesis of this show, that Kami is a very troubled character, and every time he is presented with challenges or trauma, he doesn't know how to deal with it, and he throws himself into his work to try to seek some control in the kitchen environment because he doesn't really feel like he's got control on other aspects of his life. One of the bits that I thought worked really well was seeing that sort of cycle filter down, where you see Kami finally creating the dish that he's the most proud of after this pressure. It's like a diamond, like he's put under this pressure from that mean chef, Joel McHale. He's in that situation because he's fleeing all sorts of other issues he's got. He finally nails the perfect dish. And who is it who eats that dish? It's Sid. And she's like, I want to work with this guy. What a genius. Not aware at that time that he could only create something so masterful because of all the shit that he's carrying and how that hardened inside of him. And then you see over the next 2.5 seasons, the way that Kami brings that trauma and stress onto her as well. I thought that was a really interesting way to tell that story. But like I said, it was a restatement of everything we know. We know that Kami is like a bit of a piece of shit who isn't handling himself well. So did it push things forward? Not really.
Yeah, and how many times do they have to tell us that Kami is traumatized and that he puts that out on people? Like, to me, it was just like, oh my God, how many more times do we have to see Kami has problems? Kami is like a perfectionist, blah, blah, blah. To me, he is the worst thing about this show. And the less of Kami in this show, and I'm sorry, Thomas, like, I hope you're not taking this personally, the worst thing, and the less of him, the better. And I just think the show is best when he's not involved as much, to me, because I know people will say to me, oh, but that's, his character is meant to be unlikable and troubled, but you can have anti-heroes in other shows and they don't feel as one-dimensional to me as Kami feels.
I might go and put on my Marcus beanie then. Feels weird. No, I do agree with you. I think there's like a few things going on. You kind of said it at the top, Mel. Season 3 for any show, like, I actually was thinking a lot about Succession last night. I feel like we talk about that show so often, but more and more as these shows, continue to like navigate their way through different arcs, it kind of just makes you realize how amazing Succession was to maintain that quality for so long. But like season 3 is famously a tricky season for any show. Like, and especially, season 1, we were like thrown into this world. Everyone was like, what an incredible show. And, they're dealing with a subject matter that is easy and that you're building something, from the ground up. And then season 2, they get this thing going and like that's easy too in a way. But then like where they're at in season 3, like they've got it, is naturally like a less exciting subject matter, I think. And I kind of agree with you in that Kami, like, it just feels like that, we have been like rammed over the head with these messages of like Kami is like traumatized, Kami has issues. And I feel like all of the tension is so arrested right now with like everything that's going on. It's basically like we see Richie and Kami continue to have their situation. Sid still doesn't feel like respected by Kami. He offers her like an official partnership in the restaurant, but he doesn't actually listen to her or seek her counsel on dishes. The sister has been pregnant for like 3 years. It's insane. Like, I just feel like, I understand the timeline of the show, but it feels like all of the tension has like not moved forward at all. And, unfortunately, whether or not that's like a reflection of real life in this restaurant, but it doesn't necessarily then translate to really watchable TV.
Yeah, I think there's a bit to talk about there in terms of the good and the bad of this show and also the season 3 issue. Before we get there, I want to maybe we'll just move through the rest of the season and talk about what we liked and didn't like. Episode 2, it's kind of like the return to normality in terms of the structure, the non-negotiables episode. But to your point, Thomas, yeah, it's like predominantly about Richie and Kami yelling at each other, which I did find very fun and interesting, but wasn't new, wasn't that exciting. Episode 3, it's just like, here's a restaurant operating over the space of a month. Great, we've seen that over 2 years as well. Episode 4, Sid gets her own apartment. I don't really care that much about that. Marcus's mum died. He speaks at the funeral, delivers the eulogy. It's now been like a season and a half of Marcus's mum dying. Like, and no disrespect to my guy, but like that's a lot of time to spend on one minor character's like personal family issue. And then episode 5, the episode of the review where we get some of the stunt casting, John Cena. Overall, I found those episodes, like I think at least episode 1 tried to do something different and interesting. I found the rest of it really treading water. The only bits that really worked for me were Abby Elliott, who plays Kami's sister. I find her really interesting. And I get that the pregnancy story, I think that resolves itself later in the season from what I've read. But she's really interesting and compelling. And I find her to be a really interesting anchor in this show. But that's kind of really all I can say in terms of what I'm really loving about it at the moment.
Yeah, I completely agree. I think Nat, or Sugar as she's known, and Cousin Richie are like the beating heart of this show. And I actually think Cousin Richie, where Kami's character or writing of his character fails, Cousin Richie shows how you can be a complicated, traumatized character but still not feel one note. And I thought the two best scenes, and we have to say, like, in the first 5 episodes, pretty much the dialogue consists of people telling each other to shut the fuck up. Like, that is just like,
Go fuck yourself.
Yeah, go fuck yourself.
Fuck
That's
off.
like the main dialogue. But there's 2 really great scenes. That scene with Cousin Richie where he's wondering whether he needs to stay out of his kid's life for her sake.
Josh Hartnett cameo.
Yeah, he's really having a renaissance.
He
that
was
man.
really good in that
I
scene
called
too.
it.
He was
like,
great in that scene. He was a really good like stunt cast.
I was like really happy for Josh Hartnett.
He was great in Oppenheimer. Bring him back.
Yeah.
And then the other scene was the one with Sugar where she's talking about, it's this really great moment of script writing where she's talking about worrying about passing what's going on in her head and her life down into her baby. And it does show that they have the potential to do these wonderful scenes, but they're too distracted by the montages and the close-ups and the music, and they don't actually invest in these characters as much outside of the restaurant as I think that they should.
And that I feel like that's been one of the biggest things that's really bothered me. And like, I think it's fair to say I went into this show like probably more prepared than anyone to like it. But like the tricks that made the first 2 seasons so great, like these like really well-timed flashbacks, like these really kind of like beautiful montages of like the minutiae of like life in the kitchen, and not necessarily just like food being cooked, but like grease being, you know, wiped from the inside of an oven. That they now feel like the biggest kind of like papering over the cracks of like holes in these episodes, and they've completely like forgotten the idea, you know, probably something you hear in the kitchen all the time, like less is more, and instead they're just like aside from the opening episode, the amount of like flashbacks and montages, it's just such a like distraction. And also I think it tells any savvy enough viewer that you've like not got a great idea of what's going on in your show because you're doing this. And I guess, Osman, I was curious to speak to you about this because you are such a Marvel guy. Like, is this the whole like Avengers Endgame situation where it's like you split it in 2 and then you just dilute the quality?
I don't know what to say in response to that.
The Avengers link was not one I expected.
Yeah, also calling me a Marvel guy. Like, I watch these things because they are the most popular forms of commercial entertainment to exist, and I feel responsible as a person who engages with culture and mass consumption of it to be across them. But yeah, I mean, weirdly, annoyingly, I'm going to now sound like a Marvel guy. Avengers, the splitting of it didn't feel like this because I feel like there was so many storylines that had been built up over such a long period of time that there was enough to warrant 2 movies. I mean, we're talking about maybe like 15 hours of television across these 3 and 4 seasons. This doesn't feel like there's 15 hours or even 12 hours of storytelling to tell here. So we've got these flashbacks. We've got so many shots of Kami deciding what micro herb to put on. So many shots of him cooking food and throwing it in the bin. And it's not clear to me what purpose they serve. You know, we had this conversation about action scenes and sex scenes, and people say, what's the point of them? All these different sort of scenes can tell you something about a character. But for Kami at this stage in this show, it's not clear what these scenes are supposed to represent. And Mel, you're right about Richie and Sugar being the most interesting because despite them playing specific roles in relation to how Kami and the rest of the crew are doing, we know about their lives. We know what they're thinking about. We know what they're trying to process. We even know that Richie is obsessed with William Friedkin and Michael Mann films, right? That's like a fleshed out and interesting and compelling character who is trying to work at his job, find some meaning in his life through his profession, manage his divorce and his kid and his ex-wife getting married. He's got a relationship with the maitre d' that worked at Ever, the really fancy Olivia Colman restaurant. We understand all these things. For Kami, what's going on in his life other than he's just like quite stressed out in the kitchen and misses his ex-girlfriend who's not in the show at all so far. So it's just flashbacks. It's a really bizarre situation I think the show's ended up at.
And I was thinking about this a lot when watching the first 5, because I particularly agree that, like, I really do unfortunately think Kami is the least interesting character, and the show was so kind of like critically lauded for expanding that ensemble cast and giving everyone like equal billing. And then it was so funny to find the first episode especially, but generally the vibe of the first 5 kind of like batch of episodes is Kami is like really front and center again. And I was thinking about like what role does the reputation of the show, like Jeremy Allen White has no doubt become the biggest star from this show. Like, I think Ayo Edebiri has a case also to make for how much her stock has risen. But those two really, let's say, from The Bear doing so well, have become like these huge pop culture figures now. And I wonder what the relationship like is between, the network and the creators of the show when talking about what the season will look like. Because if you look at the trajectory of the show, it felt like Kami was becoming less and less, important and less crucial to be centered. And then suddenly we get to season 3 and the gap, what's happened in that gap is that he's become a superstar, really. And then he's like right back in the frame. And I was wondering, I'm like, if that kind of speaks to, I guess, leveraging his star power, because I wouldn't have expected it to be the case.
It's a really interesting one. And also you note where like you hear these things from people like Olivia Colman and John McHale, who are these actors coming in for an episode or a scene or two. They're like, we just fly in for a day, we shoot our scenes, we fly out. It's interesting hearing you make that point because most of Kami's scenes are in like 1 or 2 sets. And we know that he's like working on, like Ayo, so many different film projects and other things right now that maybe they're 1 foot in the Bear, 1 foot out of the Bear, and that then impacts the story you can tell and the scenes that these guys can be in. The other thing I wanted to ask you guys about, I think it kind of goes to the nature of what kind of show The Bear is, what kind of show maybe the creators wanted to make and where it's going now. These sorts of like 3, 4, 5 season shows, Succession is like a clear standout that doesn't really fit into this because of just how kind of special it was. But these kinds of shows last because you create an ensemble cast, a dynamic, a vibe that you want to hang out with, right? Like shows like The Office, these workplace situational comedies or dramas. It's like, I want to see these guys for 20 episodes a year, whatever, just like get up to hijinks, just do some stuff. Maybe there'll be some plot lines about love, death, and marriages, and it's a little bit soapy. And this show has a little bit of that soapiness to it as well. But it's also very firmly, in terms of its structure and themes, that classic kind of, quote, prestige show, like more focused. It's trying to tell a particular story. It's got 8 episodes here, 8 episodes there. The stakes are really high. It's really grappling with big, complex ideas about trauma and life and work and family and all that sort of stuff. And it feels like it's kind of trying to do both those things and not doing it well. Like there's almost a version of the show where the stakes aren't so high. It's not so fucking intense and there's so much swearing. And it's just like, today is about Marcus trying to like go to the donut store and figure out what his new donut recipe is. And if the tension isn't ratcheted up, you can just enjoy that. And then you look forward to the Sid episode or the Kami episode. But the show doesn't want to give up being a very serious, dark kind of a series. And I think that is also feeding into why it feels a bit tonally mixed here. Do you guys have thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think that's right. I think you can either develop character or plot or both if you're a great show, but this season seems to be doing none. The plot is at a stasis. The characters are at a stasis. And then what might be the experimental element of the show. And of course, I do appreciate that he's mixing it up in the first. Christopher Storer is mixing it up in the first episode and some of these episodes, but I don't think it's I don't think it's working, and he's lost what did actually make the show great in the first. And also to that tonal difference, there's a lot of the Fack family comes into this. Maddie Matheson and his brother have a bit more of a lead role in the first 5 episodes. And it's very clear that they're there for some comic relief in between all the yelling. But their scenes are very slapsticky, and the juxtaposition just feels really like we've got to have some hecticness. Now we got to have some lightness. And I also found that tonally it couldn't quite pick whether it wanted to make us laugh or cry, love or hate. It was a bit confusing.
Yeah, I really found that. And, we were going to talk about, I guess, like what we think is working and not working for the season. And for me, in terms of what's not working, I would definitely say that the comedy element is, it's like, again, I feel like I am like watching the head noise of Christopher Storer on screen. Like, not only has there been a little bit of chat around the fact that, is there a bit of like nomination fraud for The Bear? It gets nominated in the comedy category for the Emmys, and it's swept that category last season. But like, this show is not a comedy, and that there's always a conversation around that. But like, there was some kind of chatter online about like, is the show like shoehorning in these comedy scenes? And it's always been kind of funny, but especially like, as you said, Mel, the fact, like Fack and his brothers have been so clearly like slotted in as this comedic relief. And previously, in previous seasons, like he had these, like funny interactions with Richie, and they all felt so organic as they were trying to fucking revive the beef and then start The Bear. Whereas now it's like we have these really intense scenes, and then we cut to Fack like buffing a floor or trying to measure up a glass, and it's so like, it just feels so jarring. It's like you're watching like comedic relief, and it just has the reverse effect. And for me, it feels like such a shame, because the show has always been so good at blending this really intense trauma and drama with like really funny bits of very natural comedy, and now it like feels like a box is being ticked.
I think what's interesting reflecting back on season 2, I don't know how you guys feel, but the 2 episodes just stand out to me are Fishes and Fork. And I feel like everyone remembers those. And they came in the second half of the season, and they were really big set piece kinds of things and doing very different things, but showing you the absolute highs and emotional lows of what television can evoke within you. If this show in its final half has a couple of episodes like that, I think that will probably drown out our issues with the first half of the season. I think it's still, the key issue still seems to be too many episodes for the amount of plot and development that they've got. But I am pretty interested to check back in next week and see how we go. But before we finish on The Bear, I had a question for you guys. And it kind of leads me to a prediction I want to make about where the season or where the show is going story-wise. The food on the show. This is obviously a show about fine dining restaurants, and food is a key part of it. I've started to come to the conclusion, or perhaps the realization, that I don't think the food on this show looks particularly good. What do you guys think?
I think I would, if I was in Chicago living in this fictional universe, I would be going to the sandwich window and not the restaurant.
I agree. I'm a vegetarian, but I reckon they made those beef shots look quite sumptuous compared to the fine dining shots that Carmi's making.
That actually sort of, you guys have stepped on my theory here. I wonder whether the arc of this show is going to be after trying to prove himself in the fine dining world and saying originally, I don't care about the chef star, and then going for the chef star and realizing perhaps that dealing with all of his issues through pouring his energy into a fine dining kitchen is not the outcome here. In fact, it is alienating him and everyone else involved from the people they love. We end up back at the original beef of Chicago, because it's interesting that this season has the guy making those sandwiches. They look great. It's successful. They're talking about how that's the only part of the business making money. I kind of think the show is going to end with them shutting down the Bear and saying, let's just make these delicious sandwiches in honor of Mike. That's my prediction.
Yeah, that seems like a classic Carmi move to destroy everything he's made everyone build from him, and once again run away from all his troubles, financial and food, and just make sandwiches again. Yeah, that
Hold
stacks
on.
up.
Like, I've been saying I'm not enjoying the show. We're not going to fucking character assassinate my boy Carmi here. A few things to add before we finish up on the Bear. Number one, I think maybe that is right. And I feel like they have kind of given us a few like clues along the way. Even in episode 5, there's a moment where Carmi, who has basically shut out everyone in his work life, family life, everything, he they drop some trays and he finds himself with Ibrahim, the guy who's running, the beef sandwich window, and he just like, they look at each other and he's like, am I fucking this up? And I thought that was interesting. In the kitchen hierarchy, Ibrahim's kind of like down the bottom, he's just doing the sandwich window, but Carmi like really genuinely asks him like, am I ruining this? And you
Very insightful of him, isn't it?
Yeah. Don't just leave him alone. But I would say it's very funny. I was reading a story from eater.com, that website, and they were talking particularly about the food. It was a food writer writing this review, and they were like, the restaurants I love, they each have like an identity and a theme, and Osman, you own a restaurant. You know how important it is to know.
I feel like I'm uniquely placed out of many people in this world to comment on this show.
Exactly. But she was like, the food that I see Kami making has like no identity. Like all we ever get told is that he's a genius and he's excellent, but like none of his food seems to make sense to him. It's just like really fine dining. Like I don't know. I don't mouthwater over any of the food. I still think about the omelette from last season that Sid made in like she whipped up. But the food here is just like, it's the worst of what people think of fine dining, I reckon.
I think that's spot on. And I think that Chris Storer knows enough about fine dining to understand that as well. Like, I don't think this is an accident. I think it only makes sense if it concludes with the realization that this is not authentic to him. Like, we talked about this, I think, in season 2 when they're making the bear and they're like, well, what is our menu going to be? It's like, if you don't have a vision for your menu, what the hell are you doing? You're sort of just like fulfilling this role that you've observed without that kind of creative spark, that passion that drives you. He's in the kitchen every episode, venison with a béarnaise foam. Like, none of that makes sense. And I think even though it's annoying to see so much of that stuff, if the payoff is, oh, I'm a fucking idiot, these delicious beef sandwiches are the best thing in the world, that's what I'm going to do. Yeah, fair enough.
And so I just wanted to lastly ask, I realize you're kind of like the uncle in your restaurant. But like if you came off air today and you had like a voicemail from your head chef and he was like, yo, Oz, I've decided we're changing the menu every single day. Also, I need $1 million for micro herbs. Would you be like, absolutely not? Or would you back the creativity?
Well, that's what the show does get, I think, so well. It nails this, the various pressures of running a restaurant in like kind of a post-COVID era. It's like, we want the best possible ingredients because that's how you make the best food. But that's pretty expensive and it's getting more expensive and farmers markets are struggling. We want to change the menu to be responsive to what's seasonally in, you know, it being produced or being grown. That's really hard to do. You don't have like an expectation from the people coming into the restaurant. The chefs are not always communicating effectively with the front of house. Like, these are all the challenges. You don't make the intake you expected for that week. That puts pressure on. You've got to cut back. All that stuff, even down to shit, we've been reviewed this week. We didn't know they're coming to take a photo. All of that stuff plays out in fine dining land. And I think the show does that well. I think what's still kind of missing is like, to what purpose? To what purpose are we exploring their anxieties about the fine dining space? I didn't answer your question directly, I realized, Thomas, but you know, I think it's a partnership. I did though have a message with my chef this morning about something financial related, but we'll keep the details of that private.
I will say, I think that if it does have some standout episodes in the last 5, that could save the season, because I remember absolutely hating the first 5 episodes of season 2. I thought they were so sappy and sentimental, and then the last half absolutely saved it. So I feel like I'm not completely ready to write off the bear. I think it could redeem itself, and even if it just has 2 episodes that everyone talks about forever, that'll be something for me.
Okay, firstly, I would say you hated last season because you didn't like that there was a love story and you thought Claire was a manic pixie dream girl and you just didn't want to bar of her, which apparently seems to be in agreement with what Christopher Storer thinks because she's basically only exists as a flashback now.
Didn't work out. Sorry, Claire.
But I remember last season, I didn't dislike the first 5 as much as you, and then the back 5 like really, really crushed it. I do think even if the next 5, and you know, we've kind of all read ahead in terms of like a little bit of reviews, and it seems that there are some really good moments coming in the back half of the season. I still don't know, even if the next 5 absolutely smack it out of the park, I just know for a fact in my fucking soul that I didn't feel the same watching these first 5 as I have previously watching the show. Like, it's edged off for me. And so, I don't know. I think unfortunately, I don't know how good this season can be, even if the next 5 are absolutely stellar.
Will you hang up your apron?
Well, I don't know. I have to seriously think about it.
My question is Molly, I don't know if Molly Gordon, because I did avoid reading about the next episodes, I don't know if Molly Gordon is coming back to play Claire, and I don't know if I want her to. I don't know if that's actually going to be really good for the show or really bad. So I am interested to see how they explore that, or if they go there.
I'm very proud of all of us showing restraint in this. Thanks for So we'll be back next week with the next 5, where maybe Thomas in real time can like burn his apron in terms of how he's feeling. Put on the Marcus beanie. Do you guys want to do a bit of a presumed innocent check-in?
Yes, I do.
Yes, I do.
So you guys talked about this with Meg, really great chat when I was off. I didn't get to talk to you guys about it. We're up to episode 4 of that show. Just to put my thoughts and feelings on the table, I really like this show. I think it's great. I think Jake Gyllenhaal is the best he's been since like Zodiac or Nightcrawler. Like he's doing really, really well, doing a similar sort of job, I think. I think this show is great. It's like one of the best crime procedurals I've seen since The Night Of. Like I love David E. Kelly. I love Jake. I love Bill Camp. I love Elizabeth Martin. Like all the side characters in this Peter Sarsgaard, they're all so good. And I'm so hooked. And I sort of sometimes hate how every episode ends in that real obvious cliffhanger way. But the show's so good and there's so many great characters and twists that I kind of don't care. I'm really, really enjoying it. And yeah, still loving it 4 eps in.
I think The Night Of is a really good comparison, and I keep thinking of that. And also, they keep saying The Night Of in the series. But
Subliminal.
yeah,
Bill
yeah.
Camp was in both as well, so there are a lot of
Exactly.
obvious allusions.
But I think that's spot on. I was thinking about it. Why do I love this so much? It's not like it's reinventing the wheel of the crime drama, but it is so slick and the characters are all so interesting and the plot moves so fast that it's just gripping to watch. And we talked about it with Meg, but because I haven't seen the original and I don't know if this deviates from the original book or movie at all, I really don't know who is responsible. Who done it. So and they keep throwing in new contenders. So yeah, it's got me completely hooked, and I would say it's maybe the best crime show I've seen this year or in some time.
Yeah, I reckon it's 100% one of the shows of the year. And it is funny because it's David E. Kelly. It almost feels like it feels very contemporary and stuff, but it feels also very 90s, like especially with the cliffhanger thing at the end of each episode. And it's like, big moment. And then like you kind of like shock and awe and then like the credits roll. I feel like that's such a 90s tool that they used to use in these shows, especially David E. Kelly. But yeah, I think it's definitely one of the shows of the year. And especially, I guess, coming off the back of talking about The Bear. But again, I reckon like the ensemble casting for this is so good. Like I could happily watch an entire bottle episode of Peter Sarsgaard being a fucking slime ball, or like, I mean, we do get so much of Bill Camp and his wife, and even their home life is like such an interesting dynamic. Like everyone.
Yeah. They're a real couple. In real life.
No, I
Really?
didn't.
Yeah, Elizabeth Marvel and Bill Camp, which I think adds an awesome layer. It makes it feel so real watching them.
Yeah, especially because like the way they bicker, it feels so real, and she's like concerned about his health. But like it's that's great. I didn't know that. But yeah, like I just think it's across the board. Like we spoke in last week's episode about I guess like crime shows and the idea of like another really gruesome death to a young woman and how that is becoming tired. And yet here we are. I do feel like unfortunately this show like slots neatly into those categories, and yet it feels like one of the most gripping shows of the year.
And if you compare the two leads, Jeremy Allen White as Carmi and Jake Gyllenhaal, they're both moody,
And hot.
quote unquote, and quote unquote complicated men, but who don't say a lot and are obviously just kind of messing up their lives and everyone else's in the process of dealing with their issues. But like the way they do it with Jake Gyllenhaal, it's complicated. It's way more complicated than what they're doing with Carmi, and you kind of hate him, you feel for him, you understand him. It has a different emotional complexity to it, I think, if you're looking at those leads.
Would you say he's so sexy?
Jake Gyllenhaal?
I mean, he's incredibly jacked in this. It's crazy how jacked he is.
I know, I was thinking, like, if that was my, I don't want to say daddy, but like...
You can say daddy.
If I was those children and that was my dad, like, imagine having Jake Gyllenhaal looking like that as your father.
Yeah, he's come off the road. What's that film?
Oh yeah, Roadhouse.
Yeah, he's come off the Roadhouse set just straight into like playing a prosecutor. And there's a couple of scenes in the first few episodes where he swims a lot. So you're like, oh, that's why he's jacked. I don't think you get that jacked from doing a couple of laps, Jake G.
I mean, he's doing a bit of other physical activity as well.
I mean, also, I think like we've all seen enough like police prosecutors. My dad's a criminal lawyer. I've been to work with him before. No, fucking none of them look like Jake Gyllenhaal. They look like Bill Camp.
I love that you brought your dad into it.
To go back to your point, Mel, about, how it compares to the film, I've seen the film. I don't know whether or not like it'll resolve itself in the same way. And I've got to say, even if I've seen the film, I don't like the show has enough going on that I'm still pretty fascinated and glued to my seat. One of the most obvious changes that I think is a really great change, and you probably won't be surprised to hear this, the role of Caroline Polimas, the murdered woman played by Greta Scacchi in the film, very reflective of the social attitude towards like women in Hollywood in the 90s, in the sense that she's basically like slut shamed for what she's done, and you don't really feel. I mean, like, you obviously feel sorry for her because she's dead, but the film is not that sympathetic to her. Whereas I think the character here, played by Renata Rensby, is far more interesting, far more complicated. She gets a rounder like life before you find out a lot more about her. And I think that's a really smart change that they've made to the show. And just the last thing I want to say, I don't know how to pronounce his last name, Oti Fabenley, who plays Nico Della Guardia, who's from the
He's so
Handmaid's
good
Tale.
too.
He's so good, and he's English, so he doesn't sound like that. So he's doing this thing with like his chin jutting forward and that kind of like, arrogant tone that he has. I would watch an entire spin-off show. Like, David E. Kelly loves doing spin-offs. I'd love to see him just being this kind of dodgy chief prosecutor in Chicago.
Just bullying Peter Sarsgaard. Those two together are they make my skin crawl.
I love it.
It's such a good show, and annoyingly, I watched ahead on the screeners, which we get access to for review purposes, but they don't drop the finale until like the data goes air, which is still a month away. So I'm now just like kind of stewing on this, but that's obviously
I thought about going ahead with the screeners, but I decided against that for that reason. I don't want to catch up and have to wait a month. But no, I'm super hooked, and maybe we should check in again at the finale and see if it's delivered. All right, guys, before we round out, we've got our regular Impress Your Friends segment, sharing something we've watched, read, listened to, consumed in culture over the past week. Thomas, why don't you go first on this one?
Yeah, perfect. This is another TV show. I thought, look, we all know the countdown to the Olympics is on. It's, I don't know, however many days away. And, we've all kind of really got into these like fly-on-the-wall sports documentaries that Netflix have been doing, Breakpoint and like the football ones and the NFL ones and stuff. But this is Sprint on Netflix. It comes out on Friday. It's 10 episodes. And I found it so fascinating. And so basically it takes you inside particularly the 100-meter male sprint circuit in the year leading up to the Olympic final. And I guess it's always been the blue ribbon event for the Olympics. Obviously Usain Bolt won it 3 Olympics in a row. It's kind of that one event that everyone tunes into. It's like everything to athletics. And it follows, I guess, the major contenders. And I just found it so interesting to meet these guys. The first episode is basically about the Olympic champion, the Italian Marcel Jacobs, and then like the next up-and-comer, Noah Lyles, this young American guy. And basically those two are going to be like, it seems, battling it out at the Olympics. But it just shows you like what goes into the training for this, how insane it is to like spend your life basically working on a 9-second run. It did the exact thing that I want a sports documentary to do, which is like give you insight into a part of this, I guess, like arena that you never really go into or you have no interest in. So yeah, that's Sprint on Netflix. I really, really enjoyed it.
Great shout. Very excited to watch a bunch of sport docos in the lead up to the greatest sporting event every 4 years.
Mine actually is also a sporting choice. Like, if this isn't enough reason why we shouldn't be enough to get us sent to the Olympics, I don't know what is.
I reckon that's a long shot.
Every time
bigger issues in the fire, Mel.
Yeah, that's true. Still, every time I see the sports editor here, I'm like, we're ready to go. Like, we've got our bags packed. Mine is the tour to France.
Oh, thank God someone mentioned this.
Which I know you're a big fan of. I don't think we've quite convinced you, Thomas, yet to get into cycling, but I would like to.
It is very funny. Like, whenever we talk in our group chat, there's very few things that like all three of us don't like discuss together. And then whenever you guys start talking cycling, have you noticed I just disappear for like a day?
Yeah,
I think you and I have a couple of things that we just talked that Mel politely ignores, probably for like sake of her mental health and sanity. But there are not many things that just Mel and I are on a track on that you aren't in. And it's like Le Tour is the main one.
It is.
Yeah, that's it. It's stage 5 tonight on SBS. If you never watched it, I honestly think you don't have to be across the rules, because cycling tours can be very confusing. There's a lot going on. There's a lot of people, teams, strategy, rules, positions. I don't even think you need to worry about that. You can just turn it on and watch 6 hours of lovely countryside, people riding their bikes, great commentary team, Matthew Keenan, Bridie O'Donnell, Simon Gerrans, this perfect mix of kind of medical expertise, cycling knowledge, and just enjoy yourself. Enjoy the tour pets that pop on. That's when people send pictures of their pets watching the tour. Enjoy the food. It's just delightful. And Thomas, can you watch it?
I couldn't agree more. We should have done a whole episode on this. Like, it is amazing to watch. There was the bit of the trivia that you get, Guillaume cooking, telling you what regional cuisine is like. There was this bit where Bridie was talking about a town in Italy, because the tour started this year in Italy, that they were going through, and they were like, that building there, that there was like this helicopter shot, this old museum, holds the Beretta pistol that was used to shoot Benito Mussolini. And I'm like, that is awesome. I am just watching a bunch of weird men cycle, and I'm learning some history. I'm learning some details about the history of Italian fascism. That is great.
Do you feel like, does it relax you? Because it's often before bed, and I feel like you guys are texting while I'm like trying to go to sleep, and you're like, yeah, and this is like, is it a cathartic thing?
It is a very pleasant view, but I also really do admire the athleticism of these men competing. Like, they go back to back for 3 weeks. They're covering hundreds of kilometres at gradients that are, I mean, I don't know if you've ever ridden a bike, but gradients that are completely insane. And they fall off and they get sick and they just keep going because they have this one opportunity, and their window professionally for competing is so small that it really is high stakes. And then you kind of wonder, like, there's not heaps of money in cycling. Like, it's not a sport that...
Yeah, they're freaks. They're total freaks.
They're doing this for... It's just... I really admire that too.
I think it's similar to Test cricket in a way, in that so much of it is just very peaceful and meditative to watch, and quite beautiful in terms of the aerial shots over the French countryside. But then there are these moments that kind of come up out of nowhere where someone will just challenge someone to win a point in a sprint or in a climb, and you just see something really exciting, and then it just goes back to being this relaxing lull of the waves just gently crashing over you as you try to go to sleep. It's great stuff.
And also, man, the field art. So in the tour, there's a whole thing where, like, there's everyone in the fields does like artwork, and they're insane. Like, when you see hundreds of tractors going around in a circle to make the wheel of a bike, look, just watch it tonight. We'll text.
Okay, fine. I will give it a go. You have impressed me, and I am your friend. So look, no doubt our listeners will get on board.
That's why we called it that. Mine is a TV show. You guys remember the film that came out in 1994, Interview with the Vampire?
I do, yeah.
Starring Brad Pitt and Tom Cruise, Kirsten Dunst, Christian Slater, based on the novels by Anne Rice. Turns out, like, quietly, for the last 2 years, there's been one of the best TV series around that is an adaptation of the books as well. It's a TV adaptation compared to a film adaptation. It's on ABC iView, actually, Interview with the Vampire. It stars Australia's Sam Reid, also Jacob Anderson. It's really, really good. It's not that kind of like True Blood, Twilight sort of a thing. It's a bit darker, a bit more interesting. It feels more contemporary in terms of what it's trying to grapple with. The books famously have these quite sharp queer themes to them that the film largely eradicated, like very, very subtle there. They're back in this in a really interesting and fun and sharp way. And I think it reminded me of like the Ripley TV adaptation in that way, right? Where we had this Ripley film that was great, but soften some of the edges of the original source material, and then it takes you some time to delve back into them. Interview with a Vampire is doing that. It's sort of like going back to the text and picking the bits that are interesting but maybe didn't feel right in the early to mid-90s. It's just been renewed for a third season, but the first two are on iView. If you're just looking for something that's like fun and interesting and dramatic, give this series a go. Sam Reid, people might know him from The Newsreader. He's really great. Great Australian actor, great in this series. That's my rec.
That's a good one. Is it scary?
No, I wouldn't say so.
Yeah, but you're pretty brave.
Yeah. It's like about vampires, but like a horror themed show. It's like American Horror Story. It's not going to make you jump up and be. I mean, it might. I don't know about the threshold for these things.
I mean, considering you spent the last, 6 weeks just watching polite countryside and tractor art.
I get the heebie-jeebies pretty easily.
Guys, that was a great conversation about a bunch of television. Looking forward to your thoughts on the tour, and looking forward to chatting with you guys next week about what will hopefully be a better and more redeeming second half of The Bear.
Looking forward to it.
Let it rip.
This episode of The Drop was produced by Chi Wong. If you enjoyed listening to today's episode of The Drop, make sure to follow us in your favourite podcast app, leave us a review, or better yet, share it with a friend. I'm Osman Faruqi. See you next week.